It was a bright, warm afternoon when Danielle Thompson, a confident and poised woman in her early 30s, walked into the luxurious Oakwood Hotel. The lobby, as usual, was bustling with guests. Some checking in, others waiting to be seated, all caught up in the business of their day. Danielle, dressed in a stylish but simple outfit of a tailored blazer, dark jeans, and heels, seemed to blend in effortlessly with the crowd. But beneath her calm exterior, her heart was racing. She wasn't here as a guest. She had a plan, one that would change everything. Her purpose was simple: to scout the hotel, understand its operation, and most importantly, evaluate its worth. You see, Danielle was not just an ordinary woman. Despite being born and raised in a modest neighborhood, she had clawed her way to the top in the world of business, and her latest goal was ambitious. She wanted to purchase a controlling stake in a hotel chain, but things didn't go as she had hoped. As she settled into one of the plush chairs in the lobby, flipping through a brochure for the hotel's amenities, a sudden shift in atmosphere caught her attention. She wasn't alone in the lobby. A group of well-dressed business travelers, including some employees from the hotel, were seated in the area. Danielle had noticed their glances earlier, but now their stares were growing more intense. Sneaky whispers exchanged behind hands and judgmental glares thrown her way. It didn't take long for the first comment to be made aloud. "Hey, is she waiting for someone? I think she's been here for a while now," one of the employees muttered to a colleague nearby. Danielle pretended not to hear, though the words stung. She had experienced similar treatment before, being judged based on her appearance and her skin color, but she didn't let it bother her. Not now, not when she was so close to her goal. Yet the whispers were becoming louder, the stares more pointed. Then, a hotel security guard, a tall man with a stern face, approached her. His tone was polite but firm. "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm afraid we have a policy against loitering. I'll have to ask you to leave the lobby." Danielle's eyes narrowed, but she maintained a calm, composed expression. She had expected something like this to happen. After all, she was a black woman. And despite her expensive taste and polished demeanor, she knew that some people would see her as out of place in the posh hotel. She had prepared herself for this moment, but it didn't make it any easier. "Loitering?" Danielle echoed, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not loitering. I'm just waiting." The security guard's eyes flickered with discomfort, but his orders were clear. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's just the policy. You'll need to leave." Danielle could feel the heat of embarrassment rising in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She stood up slowly, offering a smile that was anything but warm. "Of course," she said, her voice smooth but laced with a quiet fury. "I'll leave, but I want you to know something. I'll be back tomorrow, and when I do, you'll know exactly who I am." Her words hung in the air for a moment, and Danielle could see a flash of confusion on the guard's face. Still, he stepped aside to let her pass. As she made her way toward the door, she could hear the whispers escalating behind her. "Who does she think she is?" One of the hotel staff muttered, barely loud enough for her to hear. "She doesn't belong here." Danielle didn't respond. She simply walked out of the hotel, the heavy doors swinging shut behind her, but her resolve was stronger than ever. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, the Oakwood Hotel was alive with its usual rhythm. Guests coming and going, the staff hustling behind the scenes, and the managers overseeing the operations. The sun shone through the large windows in the lobby, casting a warm glow on the polished marble floors. But today there was something different in the air. Danielle Thompson wasn't just any guest. She wasn't here to enjoy the luxury of the hotel, or even just to observe. She was here with a mission, one that no one, not even the hotel's management, could have anticipated. As the morning hours ticked by, the staff continued with their daily tasks, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. Then, at precisely 10 a.m., a sleek black town car pulled up in front of the hotel. The driver, impeccably dressed, opened the door for the passenger, and Danielle stepped out. Her presence was commanding, her expression unreadable as she walked toward the entrance. The security guard from the day before, standing at his post near the door, didn't recognize her immediately. But as she approached, his eyes widened in shock. Wait a minute. You," he began, his words faltering as he recognized her. The woman who had been asked to leave just the day before was now standing before him, her face serene, but her eyes sharp with purpose. Danielle walked past him without acknowledging his stunned expression. The doorman, who had been unaware of the previous day's events, opened the door for her with a polite smile, But the moment she crossed the threshold, the energy in the room shifted. The employees who had witnessed her ejection were present, behind the counter, by the front desk, and in the lobby, all of them unaware that the very woman they had so carelessly dismissed was now standing among them again. But today, Danielle was not just a woman waiting for something. Today, she was the reason the hotel's future would be reshaped. As she walked further into the lobby, the murmur of conversation paused. Whispers began to swirl. "Is that her? The woman from yesterday?" someone whispered. Danielle didn't look at them. She kept walking, her heels clicking on the marble floor, each step drawing the attention of every single person in the room. She passed the check-in desk, where the receptionist gave her a hesitant glance. Then she made her way toward the elevator. The staff, still in disbelief, had no idea what was happening. Inside the hotel's upper floors, the management offices buzzed with phone calls and meetings. It was there, on the 10th floor, that the real shock would be delivered. Danielle had already made her move the night before. With the help of her contacts, she had purchased a controlling stake in the Oakwood Hotel chain, becoming its newest co-owner. No one in the company had seen it coming. The shares had been carefully acquired, and the paperwork filed without a single hint of her involvement. Her investment had been swift, deliberate, and precise. Now she owned a significant portion of the hotel chain, and she wasn't here just to observe. She was here to claim her place. When she reached the penthouse suite where the hotel's executive team was gathered, Danielle paused for a moment outside the conference room door. She straightened her blazer and prepared herself for what would be one of the most satisfying moments of her career. Inside, the management team, led by the hotel's general manager, Robert Green, sat around a polished wooden table, discussing the latest quarter's numbers. Robert was in mid-sentence when the door opened abruptly, and Danielle entered, unannounced. The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward her in shock, confusion, and curiosity. Robert, who had seen her leave the hotel the day before, was the first to speak. "Excuse me, may I help you?" His voice was tentative, unsure of what was happening. Danielle's calm gaze swept across the room, making sure each person knew she was in control. Then, with a quiet, assured voice, she answered, "I'm Danielle Thompson, and I'm here to discuss how you treat your guests and your new co-owner." The room froze. Robert's face shifted from confusion to realization, as if a light bulb had gone off in his head. The others around the table looked between each other, their expressions a mix of disbelief and growing apprehension. They had no idea that this woman, the one they had dismissed just the day before, was now their co-owner. Before anyone could respond, Danielle continued, "I was in your lobby yesterday. I was told to leave because I didn't fit the image of your ideal customer," she said, her voice unwavering. "I was kicked out for loitering, but today, I'm not here to ask for an apology. I'm here to remind you who holds the power now." Her words hung in the air, heavy with authority. The team around the table exchanged uncomfortable glances. They hadn't seen this coming, and now they had to face the consequences of their actions. The room was tense. The once comfortable atmosphere of the conference room had shifted into something colder, more calculating. Danielle stood tall at the entrance, her presence dominating the room. She wasn't just any investor. She was the one who would reshape everything. Robert Green, the hotel's general manager, cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of control. His hand hovered near the stack of papers in front of him, as if he were searching for something to say, something to justify the actions of his team the day before, but nothing came to mind. The truth was undeniable. I didn't know you were here to," Robert began, but Danielle cut him off with a sharp, measured tone. "Let's not pretend you weren't informed of my purchase last night, Robert," she said, her voice smooth but laced with an undeniable authority. "I'm not here for explanations or excuses. I'm here because you and your team failed to recognize something very simple: respect." She stepped forward, walking slowly around the table, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Her eyes scanned the faces of the management team, all of them now aware of their mistake. They had misjudged her. Not only had they ignored her yesterday, but they had humiliated her in front of the staff. And now she was in a position to make them feel the weight of their actions. "Yesterday, you treated me like I was an outsider," Danielle continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You assumed I didn't belong here. You assumed that my appearance and my background made me less worthy of your time and your respect." She paused, letting her words settle into the silence. The tension in the room was palpable. Some of the executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their faces turning red with embarrassment. Others avoided her gaze, too ashamed to meet her eyes. "I'm sure you all have some excuses," Danielle said, her voice growing colder, more detached. "But I'm not interested in hearing them. What I want is change. Real change." Danielle walked toward the window, looking out at the sprawling cityscape below. The view was impressive, one of the perks of being in a penthouse suite. But today the view was meaningless to her. What mattered now was how the hotel treated its guests, and more importantly, how the staff treated people like her. "The way you run this place needs to change," she said, turning to face the room once more. "It's clear to me now that there's a culture of discrimination here. Not just against people like me, but anyone who doesn't fit your narrow idea of what a proper guest should look like." She let that statement sink in. The executives exchanged nervous glances. They knew she was right. They had all seen the way certain guests were treated differently based on their race, appearance, or even social status. It was a problem that had festered for too long, and Danielle was here to rip it out by its roots. "I've been in business long enough to know when something's broken," she continued, her voice resolute. "And Oakwood Hotel is broken. Your customer service is a joke, your staff's attitude is disgraceful, and the very core values of this place are built on judgment and exclusivity." One of the executives, a man in his mid-40s with thinning hair and a nervous demeanor, spoke up, his voice wavering. "What do you want us to do, Ms. Thompson? We've always operated a certain way," and Danielle held up a hand, silencing him before he could finish. "I'm not asking for your opinion, I'm telling you what's going to happen next." She turned to face the room again, her eyes scanning each of them. "Effective immediately, we are implementing a new set of rules here. The first and most important rule: no more discrimination. No more assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't. Every guest will be treated equally, regardless of their background, their race, their gender, or their appearance." There was a long pause as the executives absorbed her words. Some looked like they wanted to protest. Others seemed too afraid to speak up. Danielle was now their co-owner. She had the power to make sweeping changes, and she wasn't going to back down. "I also expect transparency," she continued, her voice firm. "I want regular reports on guest feedback, employee performance, and any complaints that arise, and I want to know what's being done about them. If any of you—" She paused for effect, letting her gaze fall on the room's leadership. "If any of you are unwilling to make these changes, I suggest you start looking for another job." The room fell silent once more. This was no longer a conversation, it was a directive. Danielle had taken control, and there was no going back. "Now, I expect all of you to leave this meeting with a clear understanding of what's at stake," she said, her voice softer now but still commanding. "You'll have 1 week to present me with a plan of action for these changes. A real plan. Not a vague proposal, but something concrete. If it's not up to my standards, I'll make the necessary adjustments myself." With that, Danielle turned to leave the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The executives watched her go, stunned into silence. They had underestimated her, and now they knew that she was a force to be reckoned with. As Danielle exited the penthouse suite, she felt a rush of satisfaction. The battle wasn't over yet. But today was a victory. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, she would start building the kind of hotel empire she had always dreamed of. The following days at Oakwood Hotel were anything but ordinary. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the entire building knew that something monumental had shifted. Danielle had made it clear to the management team that change was coming, but what no one fully understood yet was how deep and far-reaching that change would be. By the end of the week, the employees had begun to notice the difference. No longer were they shielded by the comfort of their old ways. They no longer felt that invisible wall between themselves and the guests they served. A sense of unease had taken hold. It wasn't just the management team that was worried about their future, it was everyone. Danielle had started her personal review of the hotel's operations, beginning with the frontline staff. She had visited the front desk on multiple occasions, observing the interactions between the employees and guests. She'd seen it all: the uncomfortable glances, the dismissive tones, the way certain guests were given more attention than others simply based on their appearance or perceived status. What she found wasn't surprising, but it was still disappointing. She had expected resistance from the staff, but the subtle discrimination was far worse than she had imagined. It wasn't just the hotel's management that had failed to create an inclusive atmosphere, it was systemic. The culture that had been cultivated here over the years had created an environment where bias and prejudice were silently woven into every exchange. Danielle knew that confronting this wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't enough to simply give speeches in a boardroom. She had to be present, in the trenches, with the staff. She needed to show them that this new direction wasn't just some corporate initiative. It was a philosophy that would guide everything about the hotel. One afternoon, Danielle decided to sit in the lobby and observe the flow of guests for herself. The hotel lobby was a spacious, luxurious area, with plush velvet chairs and a grand chandelier hanging from the ceiling. It had once been the crown jewel of the Oakwood Hotel, a symbol of elegance and exclusivity. But now, for Danielle, it felt more like a stage, one where the performance of its employees would determine the future of the hotel. She arrived just as the rush of afternoon check-ins was beginning. Travelers from all over the world were arriving, some with expensive luggage, others with nothing more than a backpack slung over their shoulder. They all had one thing in common. They were looking for a place to rest, a place where they would be treated with respect. As Danielle took a seat in one of the plush chairs, she watched closely. A young couple walked up to the front desk, their arms linked, clearly in high spirits. The receptionist, a woman in her 20s with short blonde hair and a bright smile, greeted them warmly. But as the couple turned away to grab their bags, Danielle noticed the receptionist's eyes briefly scan their clothing, a simple dress for the woman and a neat button-up shirt for the man, and then, just as quickly, turned to a family of 4 entering the lobby. The family, all dressed in cheap clothes and looking slightly disheveled, were treated with far less enthusiasm. The receptionist greeted them, but the warmth was gone. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to most, but Danielle caught it. This was the kind of behavior that had to change. She watched as a well-dressed older man approached the desk next. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw him. He was wearing a tailored suit, his posture confident. She practically jumped out of her seat to assist him, showering him with attention as though he were royalty. The pattern was clear. The better you looked, the better you were treated. And for those who didn't fit into that ideal, they were sidelined. Danielle didn't need to wait any longer. It was time to make her presence known. She stood up and walked toward the front desk, her heels clicking on the marble floor with authority. As she approached, the receptionist looked up and froze for a second, her face flushing slightly. Danielle didn't acknowledge the receptionist's reaction. Instead, she directed her attention to a nearby employee who had been watching the scene unfold. "I've seen enough," Danielle said, her tone direct and firm. "Is the manager around?" The young employee, clearly startled by her sudden appearance, scrambled to find an answer. Ms. Thompson, he's in his office. Should I?" "No," Danielle cut in, her gaze never leaving the receptionist. "I'll handle this myself." She turned back to the desk and addressed the receptionist directly. "Tell me, do you think that treating guests differently based on their appearance is acceptable here?" The receptionist stammered, unable to form a response. Her gaze flicked nervously toward the other employees behind the desk, hoping one of them would come to her aid, but none of them did. They all knew the truth. They had seen it happen, day in and day out, and now Danielle was here, holding them accountable for it. Danielle didn't wait for the receptionist to answer. Instead, she walked around the desk, her gaze scanning the other employees. This is not a hotel for only the privileged few. This is a place where everyone, no matter who they are, should feel welcome and valued. Your actions yesterday and today are unacceptable. The employees around her shifted nervously. They could feel the weight of her words. Danielle paused, letting the silence stretch out. She wasn't angry, but her disappointment was evident. "I'm giving you one chance to change. If you can't meet the standards I expect, then I will have no choice but to make the changes myself." She turned sharply, walking away from the front desk, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence that would linger in the air long after she had gone. The morning after Danielle's visit to the lobby was a tense one for the hotel staff. Word had spread quickly about the encounter. Some of the employees had heard her stern words, while others only saw the aftermath. The nervous glances exchanged between colleagues, the uncomfortable silence that hung over the hotel like a cloud. It was as if the very air had shifted, and no one could be sure what the new regime would bring. Danielle had made it clear. This was her hotel now, and the culture was going to change. The employees were walking on eggshells as they went about their duties, trying to anticipate her next move. Those who had been involved in the confrontations the day before couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. They had expected their behavior to go unnoticed, or at the very least, tolerated. But now they understood that Danielle wasn't just some distant figurehead. She was a woman who demanded respect, and she wouldn't tolerate any form of discrimination, no matter how subtle. Meanwhile, Danielle spent the day in meetings with various departments. She reviewed the hotel's policies, from customer service standards to employee conduct codes, and found many areas in need of improvement. Some policies were outdated, others vague, and some, like the unwritten rules about who belonged at Oakwood, were downright discriminatory. The deeper she dug into the operations, the more she realized just how entrenched these biases were. As Danielle sifted through staff records and guest reviews, one thing became clear. Oakwood's reputation had been built on exclusion rather than inclusivity. The hotel had a loyal following, but it was a following of people who valued luxury, prestige, and exclusivity, often at the cost of treating everyone equally. But Danielle wasn't just looking for the flaws. She was looking for solutions. She had made up her mind. It was time to overhaul Oakwood's brand and create a space that was welcoming to everyone, regardless of race, status, or appearance. Her first order of business was to meet with the hotel's management team. They were already gathered in the conference room when she arrived, their faces tense. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew that this meeting could change the course of their careers. Danielle took a seat at the head of the table, her posture straight, her expression calm but firm. She looked around the room, noting the anxious expressions on the faces of the managers. She could sense that some were worried about their jobs, while others were already trying to figure out how they could get on her good side. "Let's be clear," Danielle began, her voice strong and measured. "The changes I'm implementing will affect everyone here. No one is exempt, and if you think this is just some phase or a set of temporary rules, I need to make it crystal clear. This is how we will operate moving forward. If you can't handle it, you won't be here much longer." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Then she continued, her tone unwavering. "We are no longer in the business of serving only those who fit a certain image. We're in the business of providing exceptional service to all guests, no matter their race, appearance, or social standing. Our guests are coming to us not just for luxury but for respect, and if we can't give them that, then we don't deserve their business." The room was silent. No one dared to speak. Some of the managers exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one challenged her authority. Danielle wasn't finished yet. "I will be implementing new training sessions for all employees. We're going to focus on diversity, respect, and creating an inclusive atmosphere, not just for our guests, but for one another. We're going to hold each other accountable, and if anyone is caught discriminating in any form, they will be immediately terminated. I'm not asking for your opinions on this. I'm telling you how it will be. If you're not on board with this, then I suggest you find another job." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. No one spoke for what felt like an eternity. Danielle wasn't angry, but her determination was palpable. This was the new standard, and there would be no turning back. One of the managers, a woman named Lisa, finally spoke up, her voice cautious but respectful. "Danielle, we understand the importance of creating an inclusive environment, but do you think these changes might alienate some of our existing guests? We've built our brand on catering to a certain clientele." Danielle nodded, acknowledging Lisa's concern. "I'm not saying we abandon the high standards that Oakwood is known for. What I'm saying is that those standards should not come at the cost of excluding others. Our reputation will grow stronger when we show the world that we can provide luxury without judgment. We can serve high-end clients while making sure that everyone, regardless of who they are, is treated equally." There was a murmur of agreement in the room, but the tension still lingered. Some of the staff members clearly feared that the changes would be too radical, while others were relieved that they no longer had to navigate the unspoken rules of favoritism. Danielle concluded the meeting with one final statement: "I expect to see results. We'll start by changing how we treat our guests, and then we'll address how we treat each other as a team. No more pretending that the old ways work. They don't. And from this point forward, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem." With that, she stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. The managers filed out of the conference room, their faces a mixture of concern and contemplation. Danielle could sense that some were already planning how to implement the changes, while others were trying to figure out how they could stay in control of their teams. But Danielle wasn't concerned about their reactions. She was focused on one thing: getting Oakwood Hotel back on track. The road ahead would be difficult. She knew that. There would be pushback, resistance, and even sabotage. But Danielle was ready for whatever came her way. She wasn't here to play it safe. She was here to make a difference, and the change had already begun. The morning after the meeting, the employees walked into Oakwood Hotel with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The hotel had never been in a more uncertain state. Danielle's words from yesterday still echoed in the halls, and everyone knew that something significant had shifted. There was no turning back now. The changes she spoke of were not just a temporary shakeup. They were a permanent fixture in the hotel's culture. Behind the counter, the receptionists were uneasy, speaking in hushed tones. As they interacted with the first few guests of the day, they couldn't help but wonder how they were going to adjust to the new rules. Would they be able to accommodate all guests equally? Would they be able to adapt to the stricter policies Danielle had promised? One employee, Jamie, had been particularly nervous. She was one of the ones who had overheard the harsh words directed at Danielle the previous day. Jamie had felt uncomfortable at the time, but had said nothing. She had watched as others mocked the woman without knowing who she really was. Now she couldn't stop thinking about the gravity of Danielle's return. Jamie had never considered herself a racist, but she had always kept to herself in the hotel. She'd avoided the difficult conversations that some of the other employees had brought up when it came to diversity, feeling that it wasn't her place to speak on matters she didn't fully understand. But after yesterday, Jamie found herself questioning everything she'd taken for granted. She walked into the staff lounge for her break and saw a few other employees gathered around, their faces tense, eyes darting nervously from one another. She sat down and tried to keep her voice steady. "Do you think we can actually pull this off? The whole diversity thing?" One of the older employees, Rachel, shook her head. "I don't know, Jamie. I've been working here for years and I've seen how things have always been. We've always catered to the same kind of people, the ones who look a certain way and act a certain way. Danielle's pushing us into unfamiliar territory." Jamie hesitated before responding. "I understand that. But if we don't change, if we don't try to do better, I think we're going to end up being left behind. We can't keep pretending that we're a place for everyone when clearly we haven't been." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You're not wrong, but change isn't easy. People are going to resist, and not everyone will get on board. We can't just expect things to turn around overnight." Jamie nodded. "I know. But I think we owe it to ourselves and to the people we serve to at least try." Rachel was quiet for a moment, then gave a small smile. "You're more idealistic than I thought, but I hope you're right." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Kelly, the receptionist who had mocked Danielle the day before. She looked even more uncomfortable than usual. "I need to talk to you guys," she said, her voice shaky. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "About what about Danielle?" Kelly muttered, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "I think we've made a mistake." Jamie's heart skipped a beat. She had noticed Kelly's behavior during the meeting the day before. She had been dismissive, almost cruel in her attitude toward Danielle. But now Kelly seemed a bit different. Her bravado was gone, replaced by uncertainty. "What do you mean?" Rachel asked. Kelly lowered her voice, leaning in. I don't think she's the kind of person we can just brush off. She knows what she's talking about. And after everything she said yesterday, I don't think I want to be on the wrong side of her anymore." Jamie exchanged a glance with Rachel. The room was still tense, but there was something in Kelly's voice that felt different from before. She wasn't trying to deflect blame or dismiss Danielle's authority. She was acknowledging it. "I can't speak for everyone else," Kelly continued, "but I'm willing to make things right. I think I need to do better. For myself, and for the people we serve." Jamie took a deep breath. "So, what now?" Kelly met her eyes. "Now we wait and see what happens next. We can't undo the past, but we can start doing better. I don't know what Danielle has in store for us, but I'm ready to listen. I hope the rest of you are too." Rachel sighed. "It's not going to be easy, but I guess it's worth a shot." The atmosphere in the room shifted. What had begun as a tense and reluctant conversation about Danielle's new rules was now becoming a more open discussion. It seemed that, despite their fears, the employees were starting to recognize that they had a part to play in this transformation. Meanwhile, Danielle was making her rounds, visiting different areas of the hotel to get a first-hand look at the changes she had initiated. She met with the housekeeping staff to discuss new cleanliness standards, ensuring that each guest room was not just pristine, but welcoming for all visitors. She spoke to the chefs and waitstaff, emphasizing that their approach to food service should cater to all tastes and preferences, with special attention paid to dietary needs and cultural sensitivities. Danielle was thorough, and her presence was felt in every corner of the hotel. She had already begun to implement new training programs, and the feedback from staff members was largely positive, even if some employees still felt uncertain about the pace of change. But Danielle wasn't deterred. She had already experienced the pushback that came with her presence at the hotel, and she knew that it was only a matter of time before the real test came. Would her employees truly embrace the new values, or would they revert to their old ways? She had one more task ahead of her that day, a meeting with the hotel's senior management. It would be their first chance to address any concerns about the changes she had set in motion, and Danielle was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was more than just about policies and procedures. This was about building a legacy. The tension would build, but Danielle knew that it was only by confronting these issues head-on that Oakwood would ever evolve into the place it had the potential to be. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the Oakwood Hotel, casting long shadows over the polished floors of the conference room. Danielle stood at the head of the table, her expression focused and determined. Today was the day she would meet with the senior management team to discuss the future of the hotel, a future that had already started shifting under her leadership. The team had been summoned to the conference room for an important meeting, and there was an air of anticipation in the room. Some of the senior managers, who had been with the hotel for years, were skeptical of the changes Danielle had begun implementing. Others were cautiously optimistic, but no one could deny the weight of the moment. This was more than just a discussion about policies. It was a reckoning. As the door opened, the senior management team filed in, their faces a mix of professionalism and underlying tension. Among them were Steve, the hotel's longtime operations manager, and Jennifer, the director of guest services. Both had seen many changes in their time at Oakwood, but none quite as dramatic as what Danielle was attempting. They exchanged glances, but neither spoke. Once everyone was seated, Danielle cleared her throat and began. "Thank you all for joining me today. I know the changes I've implemented so far have been sudden, and I know some of you may have concerns. But today, I want us to focus on one thing: the future of this hotel and how we move forward together." There was a murmur of agreement around the room, though it was clear that not everyone was convinced. Steve crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. Jennifer shifted in her seat, her expression unreadable. Danielle continued, her voice calm but resolute. "As we've discussed, Oakwood has always prided itself on serving a specific demographic, but that time is over. We need to create an environment where everyone, no matter their race, background, or appearance, feels welcome. If we don't make this shift, we risk becoming irrelevant." Steve spoke up first, his voice blunt. "Danielle, I've been running operations here for over 15 years. I understand the importance of change, but some of what you're asking us to do seems extreme. You want us to completely overhaul how we've been doing things for decades. That's not something that happens overnight." Danielle's eyes remained fixed on Steve, but her tone softened. "I understand your concerns, Steve, but I believe that if we don't act now, we'll be left behind. The world is changing, and we have to change with it. Oakwood can't afford to ignore the evolving needs of our guests. I know it's not easy, but we have to be willing to take risks and adapt." Jennifer, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "I've been following your changes closely, Danielle. I agree with the sentiment, but I'm worried about the backlash from our loyal customers. Many of them expect a certain level of exclusivity and service. If we try to cater to everyone, we might lose what makes Oakwood special." Danielle nodded thoughtfully. "That's a valid concern, Jennifer. But the truth is, exclusivity has its limits. We can still offer top-tier service and experiences, but we must broaden our definition of luxury. It's no longer just about the appearance of wealth or social status. It's about creating an experience that makes every guest feel valued and respected." The room fell quiet as the weight of her words settled in. Danielle wasn't just asking them to tweak their approach. She was asking them to fundamentally change the way they thought about their business. Steve looked unconvinced, but he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he exchanged a brief look with Jennifer, who seemed to be processing Danielle's words. There was a long pause before Steve finally broke the silence. "And what about our staff? Are we supposed to just overlook everything that's happened in the past? You're asking us to pretend that the treatment of some of our guests and employees wasn't a problem?" Danielle's gaze sharpened. "Absolutely not, Steve. We cannot overlook the past, but we must acknowledge it and move forward. That means holding ourselves accountable for the mistakes we've made and committing to doing better. This isn't just about guests. It's about creating a work environment where every employee, regardless of their background, feels respected and valued. If we can't provide that for our staff, we'll never be able to provide it for our guests. Jennifer nodded slowly, seemingly in agreement. I see your point, Danielle. But there's a lot at stake. This isn't just about implementing new policies, it's about changing the way we do business at the core. Are we prepared for the potential fallout? We can't pretend there won't be challenges. Danielle's voice grew firmer. I'm not asking for perfection, Jennifer, but I am asking for a commitment to make this work. The changes will be difficult, but they are necessary. And we have to start today. No more delays. We're in this together. And we need to show our staff, our guests, and ourselves that we're ready to embrace the future. The room was still, the tension palpable. Everyone knew this was the moment of truth. Would they accept the challenge, or would they retreat into the familiar? Steve finally spoke, his voice quieter this time. I still have my doubts, but I'm willing to try. If this is the direction we're headed, then I'll support it. But I need to know we have a clear plan for implementation. This can't just be about words, it has to be about action. Danielle's eyes softened as she looked around the room. That's exactly what I'm asking for, Steve. Action. We need a clear plan, and I'm counting on each of you to help execute it. This isn't just my vision anymore, it's all of ours. There was a pause as everyone exchanged looks. One by one, the team members nodded, signaling their willingness to move forward. The road ahead would be challenging, but they were ready to face it together. Danielle sat back, a small smile playing on her lips. This was just the beginning. The true test of Oakwood's transformation had only just begun, but today had shown her something important. They were starting to believe in the vision, and that was the first step toward real change. The next few days at Oakwood Hotel were filled with a sense of anticipation. The atmosphere had shifted ever so slightly, but it was clear that something major was on the horizon. Danielle had set her plan in motion, and now it was time for the real work to begin. She had gained the support of her senior management team, but the real test would be how the rest of the staff would react to the changes. Walking into the hotel on a crisp morning, Danielle felt the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She had faced adversity before, but this was different. Oakwood wasn't just another business to her, it had become a symbol of change, of opportunity, of hope for a future where everyone, no matter their background, could feel welcomed and respected. But it was also a business, and the road to success would be anything but smooth. Danielle had scheduled a meeting with the entire staff for the following morning. It would be the first time she would address them as the co-owner and the one who would guide them into a new era. As she walked through the lobby, she couldn't help but notice the mixed reactions from the staff she passed. Some offered polite smiles, while others cast furtive glances her way, still unsure of what to make of her presence. In the break room, she could hear snippets of conversation. It was clear that many of the employees were still grappling with the change, and some were worried about the implications for their jobs. As she passed by, she overheard a conversation between two bellhops. "You think she's really going to change things?" one of them asked, his voice low and uncertain. "I don't know," the other replied. "It's hard to say. I've heard things, but I'm not sure how far she'll actually go with it." Danielle took a deep breath, steadying herself for what lay ahead. She knew that not everyone was on board with the changes, but that was to be expected. People were naturally resistant to change, especially when it threatened the status quo. The challenge now was to prove that her vision was not just a fleeting idea. It was a necessary evolution for the hotel to survive and thrive. The meeting with the staff was scheduled for the late afternoon, and as the hour approached, Danielle gathered her thoughts. She had already prepared a speech of sorts, but she knew it had to be more than just words. She needed to connect with them, to make them feel that the changes she was implementing weren't just about policies or procedures. They were about creating a culture of respect, inclusivity, and opportunity for everyone. As the staff gathered in the conference room, Danielle could feel the tension in the air. The room was buzzing with nervous energy, and the employees who had initially mocked her were now seated in the back, exchanging uncomfortable glances. Danielle took her place at the front of the room, standing tall, her eyes scanning the crowd. She could see the uncertainty in their faces, but she also saw something else: curiosity. They wanted to know who she really was, and they wanted to know if she could deliver on her promises. "Good afternoon, everyone," Danielle began, her voice calm but steady. I know that many of you are still adjusting to the changes that have been happening here at Oakwood. Some of you may be confused or even upset. And I understand that change is hard, but I want you to know that everything I'm doing is for the good of this hotel and for the good of all of us." She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was silent, every pair of eyes focused on her. "I'm not here to make your jobs harder," Danielle continued. "I'm here to make this hotel a place where everyone can thrive. I want this to be a place where you can come to work each day and feel proud of what you do. I want Oakwood to be a place where our guests feel respected no matter their background, and where you, as employees, feel that same respect every single day." There was a quiet murmur among the staff, and Danielle could tell they were listening. She pressed on. "I know that some of you may be skeptical. Some of you may even think that I'm just another boss trying to make changes for the sake of change. But I want to assure you, this isn't about me. This is about all of us working together to create a better environment, an environment where everyone feels valued." She looked directly at the staff members who had mocked her in the past. There was no animosity in her gaze, only understanding. "I've seen how some of you have treated each other, and I've seen how some of you have treated our guests. That stops now. We can no longer tolerate disrespect. We are a team, and we need to act like one. We need to support each other, and we need to show our guests the same respect we expect to receive ourselves." The room was silent as her words sank in. Danielle could feel the weight of the moment. She had no illusions. This would not be easy. There would be resistance. There would be setbacks, and there would be moments when she would doubt herself. But she also knew that she had the power to make this work, and she was willing to fight for it. "As we move forward," Danielle continued, "I'm going to need all of you to step up. We're going to be implementing new training programs, focused on customer service, inclusivity, and creating a positive work environment. I need each of you to take this seriously. If we want Oakwood to succeed, we all have to be on the same page." She paused, scanning the room once more. This was it, the final test. Would they buy into her vision, or would they resist the changes she was trying to bring? "I know we can do this," Danielle said, her voice firm. "We have an incredible team here, and together, we can make Oakwood the hotel everyone wants to stay at, and the place everyone wants to work." There was a long pause before anyone spoke. Finally, Steve stood up, his expression hard to read. He met Danielle's gaze for a moment before speaking. "All right, Danielle. I'll give it a shot. We'll make it work, but it's going to take time. I hope you know that." Danielle nodded, a small smile crossing her face. "I'm not asking for perfection, Steve. I'm asking for effort. That's all I need." One by one, the other staff members began to nod, and some even clapped. The tension in the room began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Danielle exhaled, her heart pounding in her chest. This was just the beginning, but it was a crucial step toward the future of Oakwood Hotel. She wasn't just fighting for her vision anymore, she was fighting for all of them. The following weeks were both challenging and rewarding for Danielle. As the new co-owner of Oakwood Hotel, she was now firmly entrenched in the day-to-day operations. She worked closely with her management team, rolling out the training programs she had promised and fostering a culture of respect, inclusivity, and excellence. Every day presented a new test, but Danielle was determined to stay the course. While the majority of the staff had come to terms with the changes, there were still a few holdouts. The whispers, though less frequent, continued to circulate, and Danielle could sense that some employees were merely biding their time, waiting for the new boss to fail. But she had never been one to give up easily. She had already faced so many challenges in her life, and this was no different. She wasn't just here to make a point. She was here to make lasting, meaningful change. One day, as Danielle was walking through the hotel's lobby, she overheard a conversation between two employees that made her pause. They were seated at one of the tables, sipping their coffee, their voices low enough that it seemed like they were trying not to be overheard. "She's just here for a power trip, you know," one of them said. "She bought her way in, and now she's making everyone walk on eggshells. I'm telling you, it won't last." Danielle's heart sank for a moment, but she quickly reminded herself of the bigger picture. The challenges she faced were nothing compared to the obstacles that had been put in front of her for years. This was just one more hurdle. She took a deep breath, pushed past the doubt, and continued on her way, determined to rise above it. That afternoon, Danielle received an email from her legal team, notifying her that the hotel chain was being approached by an investor looking to purchase a significant stake. The investor was known for flipping properties, making quick changes to boost short-term profits and then selling them for a large return. It was exactly the kind of investor Danielle had worked so hard to keep out of Oakwood. As she read through the email, Danielle's stomach churned. She had worked tirelessly to establish a vision for Oakwood, a vision rooted in long-term success and fairness. This investor could ruin everything, but Danielle wasn't about to let that happen. She quickly drafted a response, informing her team that they needed to act fast to ensure the integrity of the hotel. This was no longer just about changing the culture of Oakwood. It was about protecting the future of the hotel and everything she had fought for. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and negotiations. Danielle was determined to protect the hotel and her vision, but the investor wasn't backing down. In fact, they were threatening to take the matter to court if they didn't get their way. At the same time, some of the staff began to push back against the changes. Danielle knew this would be part of the process, but it stung all the same. She had already lost some of her former allies, including one of the senior managers who had been instrumental in her initial plans. Now she had to convince the rest of the team that what she was fighting for was worth it. Then, one morning, as she walked into the lobby, she noticed something that took her by surprise. There, standing by the front desk, was Steve. He was one of the bellhops who had been skeptical at first, but had come to understand the value of the changes Danielle was implementing. Steve gave her a quick nod before approaching. "Danielle," he said, his voice low, "I just wanted to let you know that the staff's been talking, and we're with you. Whatever happens with that investor, we're going to stand by you." Danielle felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was a small victory, but it meant more than anything. It meant she wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. Over the next few weeks, the tension around Oakwood Hotel continued to rise. The investors' pressure was unrelenting, and some of the staff began to voice their concerns about the changes Danielle was implementing. But despite the growing challenges, Danielle never wavered in her commitment. She spent sleepless nights working with her legal team, refining strategies and ensuring that Oakwood remained in her hands. And then, just as things seemed like they were at their breaking point, Danielle received a phone call that would change everything. "Danielle," the voice on the other end said, "we've reached an agreement. The investor has agreed to a partnership instead of a hostile takeover. They're willing to meet you halfway and work with your vision, as long as they get a seat at the table." Danielle's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a total victory, but it was a major compromise. She had held her ground, and now she had the chance to steer the hotel in the direction she had always intended. That evening, Danielle stood in the lobby of Oakwood, looking around at the hotel she had fought so hard to protect. She knew that the road ahead would still be tough, and that there would be more challenges to face. But for the first time since she had stepped through those doors, she felt a sense of peace. The battle wasn't over yet, but she had won a crucial victory. Oakwood would continue to be a place of opportunity, respect, and growth. And as for the staff, the ones who had doubted her, the ones who had mocked her, they would learn that Danielle wasn't just a co-owner. She was a force to be reckoned with. Danielle stood at the helm of Oakwood Hotel, a quiet smile playing on her lips as she looked out over the lobby. The marble floors, the polished brass, the warm, inviting glow of the chandelier, all of it was a symbol of the work she had put in, the challenges she had overcome, and the transformation she had led. But more importantly, Oakwood now represented something bigger than just a hotel. It was a symbol of resilience, justice, and equality. It hadn't been an easy journey, but Danielle had never expected it to be. From the very first moment she had been tossed out of the hotel lobby, she had known that her story was just beginning. She had come face to face with prejudice, with doubt, and with resistance from nearly every corner. But each challenge only steeled her resolve. Over the course of the months, Danielle had built more than just a reputation as Oakwood's co-owner. She had earned the respect of the staff, and not just through authority or her position, but through her unwavering commitment to fairness, transparency, and integrity. Many of the employees who had once doubted her were now allies, and they stood alongside her in ensuring that Oakwood was a place where everyone could thrive, no matter their background or appearance. Of course, there had been those who still didn't fully believe in the changes. A few individuals remained skeptical, holding on to old ways and resisting the tide of progress. But Danielle was no stranger to this. Every organization, every community had its holdouts, those who would try to stand in the way of progress. She had seen it before, and she would see it again. But what mattered was that Oakwood as a whole was changing, and for the better. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings, Danielle found herself standing in the lobby once more. It was quiet now, with only a few late-night guests checking in. But the place felt different. It felt alive, full of potential. And for the first time in a long while, Danielle allowed herself a moment to reflect. She had fought hard to get here. She had fought for her own place at the table and for the opportunity to make a real difference. And now she was seeing the fruits of that labor. Oakwood Hotel wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. And it was doing so on terms that Danielle could be proud of. As she turned to leave for the night, Danielle paused. She looked back at the hotel, the place where it all had started, and smiled. Tomorrow was a new day, and with it, new challenges, new opportunities. But Danielle knew that no matter what came next, she was ready. She had proved to herself, and to everyone else, that she was here to stay. Oakwood was her legacy now, and it was a legacy of change.